the most important message is that, technology is not something that happens to us, exactly like you said.
Account for why the automation now the technology prosper in United States, but not so in the European countries or in Japan.
Yeah, but it's not only that. I mean, you're
sure.
absolutely right.
はい、ピボットの竹下です。エクストリームエコノミクスの特別版です。本当に世界的な経済学者の MIT のダロン・アセモグルさんへのインタビューをお届けします。一緒にお届けするのは大阪大学経済学部の安田洋介先生です。よろしくお願いします。
今日もよろしくお願いします。
はい。先生、今日、アセモグルさんってやっぱ大物ですけど、やっぱ楽しみですね。
いや、なんかもう、彼は、僕どっかで現役最強の経済学者っていうふうに形容したことがあるんですけれども、ありえないぐらい数の論文を書いてるし、で、ノーベル賞こそ取ってないけど、いろんなアワードをかつて受賞されている、本当に最強の経済学者なので、今日もね、エクストリームな視点からいろんな話を伺っていきたいですよね。
早速話を、安田先生と私で交互に聞いていきたいと思いますので、アセモグル先生に、今ボストンにいらっしゃるんですね、つないでみたいと思います。So, Professor Daron Acemoglu, welcome to Pivot, welcome to our show.
Very nice to be with you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be on the show.
Yes, so your book, Power and Progress, Our 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity is about to be out, the Japanese version to be out.
I'm very excited, yes.
Yes, and I read it and it was a fascinating book. And I learned that throughout hundreds of years of history, technology did not just appear and automatically change our world, but it was the people who tried to take control of the technology or tried to make use of technology or tried to keep an eye on technology that will not only benefit the small elites, but to all the public. So it was a fascinating book. Are you excited about that?
Thank you. You've summarized it very well.
Okay. I heard that you like this ampan sweet red bean buns.
I love it. Yes, that's one of my. I mean, there's so much interesting food in Japan. Sushi is one of my favorite food, and all Japanese seafood is wonderful. But yes, desserts are great as well.
Okay, so you have been to Japan many times.
Only once, actually, unfortunately. Yes.
So I remember you had a Lawrence Klein lecture in Osaka University.
That's right.
Where I am. But unfortunately, at that time, I had another conference presentation
we did not meet.
in Tokyo.
I realized, yes. Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a broader question and go into the details. So here's a slide you kind of used at the lectures in London. And so you talk about AI, and it's a relevant book because we're in the age of AI, and it's important to figure out who controls the future, who benefits it. And you kind of touched about how technology improves, productivity rises and workers also benefit, but this does not happen automatically. And because we need to be aware of it, because in modern times, the wages gap is kind of widening compared to high school dropouts and graduate degrees. And also, inequality is not just a US phenomenon, and we see Japan, even we thought as a very equal country, the inequality is rising. So my first question is, what was the most important message you wanted to deliver by writing this book?
Well, I think the most important message is that, technology is not something that happens to us, exactly like you said, Ryan. It expands our capabilities, and we can use those capabilities for good and bad. And for digital technologies, I think two very different directions in production and very different directions in communication exist. In production, we can use them just for automation, or we can use them for automation as well as creating new capabilities for workers, augmenting workers, creating new tasks for them. And in communication, we can either use these technologies either to control people, manipulate them, or we can use them to provide more opportunities for people to learn, express themselves, form new bonds and relationships. I think these are all possibilities that are open to us, and the key is going to be how we use them. And my interpretation, both in my academic work with David Outer, with Pasquale Restrepo and other co-authors, is that a lot of the inequality and wage stagnation implications in the United States and to some extent other industrialized countries has been because of an excessive focus. And a lot of the reasons why social media has been such a disaster for democracy and communication has been because of the way in which we have used AI-like tools for control and manipulation rather than for enriching people's political and social activities. So those are the decisions that are going to be even more important because generative AI advances are going to amplify these possibilities. So it's really important for the public debate, academic debate, policy debate to be aware of these different choices and start getting engaged with how we can make better choices.
Can I also ask something?
Of course, please.
So to start debate, I think it might be important to put different names on different type of technologies. So from, the economics terminology, maybe, one technology could be described as a labor substitute. The other one is a labor complement.
Absolutely,
but that's too, the technical. So can you come up with some good name for like automation technology and then enhancing technology?
Well, I think, the most important one, I argue, is actually creating new tasks, new capabilities.
Okay.
And if I give an example, perhaps it might help us understand, the concern, for example, in the Hollywood debates or in manufacturing, in journalism today, is whether generative AI is going to take jobs away from people. But here is a completely different path. We have a shortage of electricians, we have a shortage of nurses, we have a shortage of lots of other trades, crafts people like plumbers, carpenters, technicians. And generative AI is an amazing tool to train people, to provide people with better information so that they can increase their expertise. So if you have an electrician who needs to deal with new problems, for example, related to the electricity grid, that's going to become more and more important. Then you can either send them blind and they're not going to be able to deal with these complex problems, or you can actually redesign AI tools so that they can get in real time advice from accumulated knowledge of other electricians and other technicians from similar cases. So that would be a much more useful way of using AI, and it will be very good for electricians' wages and electricians' employment. So those are the kinds of things that when I say when more complex tasks or new tasks, it's a very different usage of these tools than automation.
Yeah. So in this way, you can, or maybe we can, to provide some narrative of, the technology. Sometimes technology is labor or human enhancing, and sometimes not. But my point is, why don't we put specific name for each, the aspect of technology? So sometimes, the conceptualizing, the idea would help us discussing. So
I think in economics and more technical things, exactly the terms labor substitution and labor complements or automation versus augmentation have been used. But I think those are technical terms.
Yes. That's my point. So
So that's why I prefer, actually, it's also more descriptive, new tasks.
Okay.
I think people understand that. If you look at a lot of people around you, they're performing tasks that didn't exist 50 years ago. Those are all new tasks that are so important for the economy and for employment.
So maybe, one example that such that, that we put the different names on essentially the same thing is the rocket and missile.
Yes.
So, technologically speaking, the things are the same, but depending on purpose or context, we sometimes called it a rocket and sometimes missile, or ICBM, something.
And of course, they do very different things, and that's
of course,
where we can use our knowledge for very different things. Another example we mentioned briefly is, the using atmospheric nitrogen to create ammonia. That was absolutely critical for producing synthetic fertilizers, but it was also used for creating more powerful bombs, explosives. So again, it's how we use this knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. So, the enhancing debate on public, the first, I think, we like to provide certain, the conceptual,
Absolutely,
the names or terminologies.
So going back to the point that we need to control AI, how can that happen? Do you need more government restriction, or should the workers go on strike? What is your opinion on that?
Well, I think, if you look at, for example, economic growth in the US, Western Europe, Japan, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, in different combinations, you had three big pillars that counterbalanced the power of corporations. You had government regulation, you had labor unions, and you had civil society. For example, in the United States, a lot of the environmental regulation, a lot of safety regulations, a lot of medical, pharmaceutical regulations came out of a civil society movements, people like Ralph Nader. So regulation and civil society action were very complementary. And labor unions played a very important role in both training and wage determinations and sometimes technology choices. And I think these are the pillars that need to be activated in the case of AI as well. And if you and I were having this conversation 2 years ago, I think most people would have said, regulation cannot work, and U.S. government's never going to catch up with regulation, and labor movement is dead. Perhaps they might have been more optimistic about civil society, but today it looks completely different. Labor movement has re-energized. People are, they are now becoming part of the conversation on the future of AI. And the U.S. Senate has several committees working on AI. The executive order by Biden is the first step in the president's office and the administration taking actions on AI. It's not easy. We know from European actions that some of them backfire, and there's going to be pushback, and we may get it wrong. But I think just starting this regulatory journey is important enough.
I ask this question because in Japan, we are suffering from the lost decades. The economy is declining. And before regulating AI, first of all, we need to catch up to AI and catch up.
Absolutely. But, look, I mean, Japan is a very interesting country. It's a superbly rich culture. But economically, it's also amazing. I mean, if you look at some areas in technology, Japan is far ahead of the United States.
Oh,
in
you think
manufacturing,
so?
Yeah, of course. Japan has about 6 times more robots in manufacturing per worker than the United States does. And robots are used very productively in Japan. And, Japanese exports are still doing very well. On the other hand, I think my understanding is that many of the service industries are very low productivity in Japan. And labor shortages are not being dealt with in those industries. So that shows that Japan is capable of doing an excellent job with new technologies, but it hasn't done so in some sectors. So that probably is related to competition, and it's related to not enough attention paid to these new technologies, especially to undo some of the effects of an aging society. It's much easier to do that in manufacturing than services, of course. But I'm actually think that Japan has the basis for doing that site of much better use of technology. And overall, I think actually countries that have labor shortages have an advantage in adapting to new technologies because, first of all, automation is not as costly in those countries. And second, when employers actually finally wake up, they will realize they really need to use the labor they have in the most productive way because there is a shortage of labor.
And also, Professor, you talked about taxes, and Professor Yasuda, you have a question about the reduction of taxes. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think the one of the possible policies you mentioned payroll tax reduction. And that would be wonderful. Well, especially I would be quite happy. But then, well, I think there are two potential concerns on this, the taxation. One is if labor cost would be reduced, then the entire incentive for technology investment would be reduced. Either. So that's one concern. And the second one is in order to reduce payroll tax, then we may, to some extent, give up, the progressive tax system, and that would, that would be bad for, from the perspective of.
No, I'm not advocating giving up progressive taxes. Actually, I don't know the situation in Japan, but in the United States, payroll taxes are regressive. Actually, if you get rid of payroll taxes, you make the tax code more progressive.
Okay.
And our suggestion would be to reduce payroll taxes and increase corporate income taxes and get rid of some of the deductions. And I think there is a way of doing that without discouraging technology adoption, but encouraging training and more augmenting technologies with workers, because now firms are not discouraged from hiring workers. Now you have your workers, you can train them, you can also give them better technology. So that's the dream. Whether we can achieve that, of course, the devil's in the details. But I think the current tax code in the United States is very onerous for hiring workers and very advantageous for doing automation.
I see. So you also mentioned, the automation tax as a potential in the future policy if we fail to implement, the kind of facilitating labor complement, the innovation or something. But
I don't think we are there yet all. And moreover, I think sort of redressing these asymmetries of the tax code, I think, is much more effective than slapping an automation tax. And I think there is need for more subsidies and government involvement in encouraging more human complementary uses of technology that can be very useful as well. And if all of these fail, perhaps in the future we may have to consider wealth taxes, automation taxes. I think a future in which more and more people become unnecessary for production and they don't have a role in society is very dangerous. So I hope we don't go there, but if we go there, I think we need to think about new policies.
So I came up with one potential type of, the automation tax, which is like, the carbon tax. We may possibly, track the information of, the labor put into the specific commodity or service, like a carbon footprint. So labor footprint.
I think we should consider those things, but only after the other two that I've mentioned. I mean, right now, if we are subsidized, we are doing the opposite. Like in the carbon context, we are subsidizing fossil fuels. So I'm saying let's get rid of those subsidies first.
So,
but yes, absolutely. I think we need a measurement framework for
measure
that, and you're providing one. Yes.
Yeah, even if the product is the same, if the put the labor force is higher, then that the product has higher reduction of the sales tax or the VAT or something like that.
That will be, and then but there will be a debate there. Is the actual labor input that matters, or the labor share of value added that matters?
I see.
There are different ways of doing it. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there could be possible different measurement. Yeah, I agree with you.
I think Professor Yasuda talked about the reduction of payroll taxes because if you look at history, England, when the Industrial Revolution happened, the wages in England were relatively high compared to other.
So the continental European countries, So
what do you think about the effect of wages and what we see in the modern society today?
Well, I mean, in the United States, it's takes the starkest form. Median wages have been, essentially constant. I mean, they've increased a little bit, but they've increased very little for 4 decades. So we are, of course, U.S. is a high wage economy compared to Vietnam or China, but it is not as high wage as, it used to be in the 1980s. So, but there is a cautionary tale there. We talked about the labor movement, for example. If what the labor movement does is ask for higher wages, but nothing else, and if the tech industry supplies a lot of automation tools, that will just encourage more automation for the reasons that you have pointed out, Ryan. And so I think that's why it's important that the labor organizations become much more focused on can we use AI in a way that's pro-worker.
Because the Japanese wages for 30 years, it hasn't changed.
Right. Japan is also less high wage than it used to be. That's right.
Do you know how we can fix this?
Well, I think, in basic economic theory, wages are equal to, or at least they very strongly co-vary with marginal productive labor, which means labor's contribution to productivity. So I think that's what we need to increase. And the pro-worker direction of digital technologies and AI is exactly about that.
Mm.
Actually, I quite suspect if that theory applies to Japan.
Because there is bargaining, of course, and there are other factors. That's why I said not equal necessarily, but proportional. So as long as you have a somewhat competitive labor market, meaning that it's not coercive and it's not like a single monopsony, I think higher marginal product will have an effect on workers. And I think part of the reason, not the only reason, and we discussed, for example, how the weakening of unions and other things like monitoring technologies have played a role as well. But one of the reasons why wages have not increased in the United States is precisely because the contribution of labor has not increased because of our technological choices.
So, well, I think labor unions are weak compared to the past, the history in many countries, including, US and Japan. But looking at kind of labor law in the United States or in European countries or in Japan, the huge difference is when the firm like to fire the employees. So for those the dismissal regulations are quite different, I think.
Yeah, that's maybe one of the factors, right?
Yeah. And that the institutional difference may to some extent account for why the automation automational the technologies prosper in United States, but not so in the European countries or in Japan.
So, yeah, but it's not only that. I mean, you're absolutely right. Both from a regulatory perspective and because of the long-term relationship between employers and employees, firing workers is much less attractive to Japanese employers.
Yeah.
But also, that is symbiotic with how technology is used. So we mentioned this briefly, but the early introduction of robots in the car factories in Japan went in a similar direction to the one in the United States, according to the qualitative accounts. I have not seen quantitative work on this, but qualitative accounts, that workers were sidelined and robots started performing the tasks. And then Toyota and other companies discovered that this led to low quality output. And so they brought the workers back as quality inspectors, working as technicians with the robots. So it's a different way of introducing robots. And once you have this way of doing things, which turned out to be better for quality control, then of course you don't even need to fire the workers.
So your story about Toyota is, I think, that could be generalized in other companies. So from the viewpoint of each company, it makes sense, to employ, the automation technology, or it doesn't matter whether, the technology is a labor substitute or complements, as long as it would, the increase profits, then, it may make sense. But as a country or as a broader perspective of economy, maybe, the better decision for single firm may not be good decision.
Absolutely. So I think if a lot of people lose their jobs, inequality increases, that's not good for democracy. So yes, and then there are other factors as well. Managers often have a desire to control labor, even when that's not actually good for the overall productivity of the company, because labor unions can sometimes be troublesome. But I also argue that sometimes companies can do very well by using technologies in a worker complementary way. After all, workers are still the most important resource of companies.
So in that respect, so what's happening right now on the AI-oriented technology is somewhat similar to what happened in 90s or 2 decades ago in the time of the deindustrialization or hollowing out. Many Japanese the manufacturing countries, including Toyota, started to open their plants in Asian countries. And the combination of good technology and cheap, intelligent labor would be quite profitable for those firms.
Absolutely. I think AI is presenting a lot of different opportunities. This is why this is the really important time to have an enhanced debate on how we want to use AI.
But as an analogy, the story about AI and the story about those deindustrialization, is one thing that we could, use to, understand the similarity, of what we have experienced.
Absolutely.
By the way, Professor Asemogu, do you use ChatGPT?
I've used it and I found it's impressive in some ways, but I also found it lacking, that not reliable, makes frequent mistakes. I think there's a lot of hype when it comes to ChatGPT.
Do the students in MIT use ChatGPT to write reports?
Some of them do, but it's not that widely used, actually. This is the best students don't get that much out of it at the moment.
Well, so I also sometimes use ChatGPT, and I'm a bit afraid that in the near future, well, the maybe undergraduate students, in the help of ChatGPT and write a good article, and then those, the paper could be published in top 5 journal or something like that.
We'll see. We'll see. We're not there yet.
Not there. I hope. But once, that would become possible, then I'm wondering how, our academia would change. So far, the peer-reviewed journal would be the good measurement or a certain measurement of, the capability of researchers. But
yes, I don't think we have anything to worry about for the next several decades, but we'll see. I may turn out to be wrong.
So before wrapping up, Professor, you touched on China, and I want to talk about China because, what if China, they're gaining economic power, and what if China just keep growing and not redirecting technology, as you mentioned in the book? I think the Chinese people should read your book, but what happens if they
it cannot be translated into Chinese because of censorship. But no, I don't think China is going to keep on growing and growing. There are too many economic problems. I don't expect the imminent collapse of the Chinese growth model, but it's running into more and more issues. But China is continuing to influence the direction of technology, and they're investing a lot in surveillance technologies. And they're actually exporting these surveillance technologies. Huawei by itself exported monitoring technologies, face recognition, and censorship technologies to more than 60 other countries. So China is going to play a role in the direction of future innovation. But I think that doesn't mean that US and other industrialized countries and Japan cannot play an even bigger role, especially when it comes to human augmenting technologies.
Because Japanese entrepreneurs are worried about if we try to redirect and control technology, China will go ahead of us.
No, I don't think that's I think in many areas of the cutting edge research, China is behind.
So Professor Yasuda, do you have any final questions?
Oh, yeah. So related to the last debate, in your previous book, Why Nations Fail, you focused on 2 important concepts, the inclusive and extinctive institutions.
Extractive, yes.
Extractive, institutions. So which institution do you think are better to handle redirection of
absolutely
technology?
Inclusive. I mean, I think extractive institutions, just as in China, will push the technology in exactly the wrong direction. But we need to have somehow inclusive plus institutions that really gain expertise in redirecting technology.
I see. But I also think, the extractive institution may have incentive to enhance labor complement technology rather than labor substitute, because
sometimes perhaps, but I think the overwhelming thing we're seeing in China is monitoring and surveillance.
Okay. The surveillance is their highest incentive, perhaps.
Yes, the highest priority.
Last final comment for our readers, please. Sorry about that. One last final comment for our readers. Could you give us some final comments for our readers?
Well, I am delighted that the Japanese audience will have access to the book so early after its publication in the United States, and thanks for all the interest.
Okay, Professor Daruno, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Very nice meeting both of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.
はい、ということで、なんとノーベル賞経済学賞最有力候補の MIT ダロン・アセモグル先生とのインタビュー終わりました。先生、ありがとうございました。
こちらこそ。
特に私、スタートアップ業界にいて、普段起業家の人インタビューしてるんですけど、この規制とか倫理っていう言葉が、すごいネガティブなんですよね。で、こういうアセモグル大先生が語るのはすごく大事なことだし、アメリカだからこそ成り立つというか、もうどんどん下手したら、もうイノベーションが起こりまくってるところにうまくコントロールしようっていうのと、イノベーションが丸きゼロのところで、コントロールするも何も、まずはちょっと、 イノベーション起こそうよって日本とでは、ちょっと違うかなっていう問題意識があったんですね。
そうですね。まあ、とはいえ、やっぱアセモーグル先生ほどのもう超大御所が、こういうなんか経済学の通説とはちょっと違うようなメッセージ、まあ、社会的なメッセージ性のある本を出されるっていう、やっぱりインパクトは期待したいですけどね。
ちなみにその通説っていうのは、例えば経済学的にはこうだけど、アセモグル先生はこう違うっていうのは、
これはなんか本書の最初のところで、著者たちも書いてますけれども、やっぱり基本的に、この、イノベーションとか、まあ、科学技術の進展とかいうのをポジティブに捉える経済学者が多いんですよね。まあ、なぜなら、平均的な生産性を向上させて、で、人々の暮らしぶりが豊かになると。で、そういう歴史を我々辿ってきたんだって。もう産業革命なんか一番わかりやすい例ですけれども、当時もね、本に紹介されている通り、ラッタイト運動があったりとか、多くの人が仕事を失ったり、暮らしぶり苦しくなった人もいるんですけれども、まあ、十分に時間が経てば、我々はみんな豊かになったんだっていう、まあ、その、なんですかね、イメージに強く支配されているので、そのテクノロジーが、進むこと、イノベーションがたくさん起きることに関して、ちょっと一歩引いて、警戒しようみたいな発想があんまり出てきにくいんですよね。でそれに対して、やっぱり今まではラッキーだっただけで、我々が今直面しているタイプのオートメーションを伴うような、技術革新っていうのはかなり警戒した方がいいし、今のうちに準備をしておくべきだっていうのが、まあ、アセモーグルさんたちのこのね、新刊本で訴えている一番強いメッセージだと思うんですよ。一方で、なんていうのかな、こういうインパクトのある本であるとか、論者の主張が、じゃあ、そのアカデミアの、大多数、マジョリティの人たちに受け入れられるかどうかっていうのはそんなに明らかじゃない気もしていて、で、一例として挙げると、ピケティさんが21世紀の資本って本当にもうグローバルベストセラーの本を出しましたよね。で、やっぱり資本主義、経済っていうのは格差を拡大させる傾向にあると。で、なんとかしなきゃいけないっていうような、まあ、メッセージを出したわけですけれども、それによって、じゃあ経済学のメインストリームの研究が、この短期間に大きく変わったかというと、そこまで変わってない気がするんですよ。もちろん、格差に関しては重要だってね、今も昔も言い続けてる人はいますし、まあそういった論文も書かれてるんですけれども、あれだけ社会的ななんかこのインパクトの大きさとか需要度を考えると、あんまりなんかメインストリームの経済学会って変わってないなって気がするんですよね。やっぱ基本的には、自由な市場経済があって、結果として格差が起きるかもしれないんだけれども、それをどうこうするっていうのは、やっぱ政治が決めることであって、経済学者としてはできるだけ、その平均的な経済成長、パイを大きくするような、やっぱ政策を追求し続けるべきだって。で、そこからはそんなにブレてない気もするんですよね。で今回のアセモーグル氏たちの新刊も、まあ、ピケティとはだいぶ違うっちゃ違うんですけれども、技術革新というのは基本的にはプラスで、その結果として仕事がなくなる人とか、格差の拡大とかあるんであれば、それを解決するのは政治で、経済学者としては別にそんな、技術革新に関して警戒する必要もないっていうような、なんかこの、学会の総意というか、平均的な意見が大きく変わらないかもしれないなっていう、まあ、危惧というか、予感はしますけどね。
それはなんでなんですかまあ、すごい大物で、あと、インスティテュートプロフェッサーっていう、もう数人ぐらいしかいない、
素晴らしい。そうなんですよ。
ハイランクの教授であって、で、まあ、もしノーベル賞を取ったとしたら、発言力は増すので、それでもやっぱ変わんないですかね、その風潮というか。
そうですね。変わるとすれば、今までなんかそういう、通説とちょっと違うこととか、まあ、例えば格差の重要性とか訴える人って、現在進行形でバリバリ論文書いているような現役の経済学者は少なかったんですよ。ピケティさんにしても、やっぱメインストリームから自ら進んで去っていったようなタイプの研究者ですし、僕が何度かインタビューさせていただいた、コロンビア大学のね、スティグリッツ教授なんかもちろんノーベル賞取ってますけれども、彼がノーベル賞を取った情報の非対称性とかの業績と、彼がこの10年、20年積極的に行っている政策提言っていうのは必ずしもリンクしているわけではないので、そういった意味では、まあ、もう研究をおおむね終えてしまった人が、割と、個人の都合で何か言ってるっていうふうに思われがちな面はあるんですよね。ただ、まあ、アセモグル氏はもう自らの、もう、ハイクラスな学術研究に基づいて、こういった本も書かれているので、インパクトの起こり方が違う可能性はあると思うんですけど、まあそうは言っても、長く平均的な経済学者が、この浸ってきた常識というか、標準的な見方を変えるのっていうのは、それなりに難しいんじゃないかって気はしますね。
あともう一個今回、本を書いて、例えばですね、変な話、ジャーナリストが格差は良くないっていうのは、簡単ではないですけど、言論として言えるじゃないですか。でもそうではなくて、やっぱ経済学者がこういう本を書くっていうのは、どんな差があるんですかね。
一つには、経済学者の中でもとりわけ、アセモーグル氏みたいな現役の、しかも現役最強の経済学者が書くことによって、アカデミックな、知見とか、研究っていう、要はあれですよね、背後にきちんとした、バックグラウンドがある、その学知に基づいた分析をしているってところがかなり大きいとは思いますね。思い込みとか思いつきではないっていうことですね。あとは、単なる格差ではなくて、やっぱり今まで、人類にとってプラスだと、ほぼ、長所しか、光があまり当てられていなかった技術革新に関して、負の側面っていうのを、大きく取り上げると。例えばですけど、アセモーグル氏自身も、関連する研究やってるんです。例えば国際貿易ですか、自由貿易に関する経済学者の視点というのも似てるところがあって、トータルで見ると、貿易って言えば国と国との取引なので、お互いウィンウィンにならない限り取引って行われないじゃないですか。なので、基本的には自由、貿易を認めるっていう発想にあるのは、ウィンウィンの取引を通じて全員が、ハッピーになれるからだと。ところが蓋を開けて、ちょっと細かく見ていくと、ウィンウィンとはいえ、それぞれの国の中でルーザーみたいなのたくさん生まれてるし、あとは先進国と新興国の貿易で言うと、やっぱ先進国の取り分というか、パイの方が全然大きくなってしまって、そこに非対称性がすごいあるんじゃないかとか、いろんなことが細かいミクロデータを丹念に分析することで分かってきたと。必ずしも、本当に制限なしの自由貿易が常に望ましいとは限らないみたいな。似たような見直しとしては、例えば産業政策みたいなものも、政府がトップダウンで特定の産業を選んで伸ばそうとすると大体失敗するんですけれども、でもある種の規制とかコーディネーションみたいなものは、健全な産業育成であるとか、あとは、産業の新陳代謝をある意味促進するっていう上で、プラスに働くとかって、そういったことも、昔はあんまり明らかじゃなかったので、とにかく、もう借地定規に政府の介入はよろしくないとか、貿易も、関税できるだけ下げて自由に貿易させる方がいいっていうふうに、主張するタイプの経済学者が多かったと思うんですけれども、徐々に変わってきたっていうのは、背後に学術知見が出てきたっていうのがあると思いますね。なるほど。アセモグル氏の今回の新刊もその流れで言うと、今までかなり楽観的な視点を技術革新とかイノベーションに持っていた我々の、頭をガツンと殴る。で、殴るだけの論文はもう今まで書いてきてるんですけど、この10年、15年。ただやっぱり論文の形だと分野の近い人しか丹念には読まないので、こういう一般の人でも読める本を出すことによって、そういった彼らが培ってきた重要な視点をやっぱり世に問う。もう幅広く、ディベートしてもらうってことにつながるのかなと思いましたね。
わかりました。ありがとうございます。やっぱりアセモグルさんの経済学者という凄さって今回感じましたか？インタビューされてみて。
やっぱ頭の回転はすごい早いなっていう。
はい。
一応ね、事前に、竹下さんの方から質問項目来たのを、お送りしてはいたのかもしれないですけれども、結局聞いたことはだいぶ違うことをアドリブで聞いてたので、それに対して即座に反応してっていう、もちろん今までこういった形のインタビューをね、たくさんこなされているから、関連付けて、こういったことを答えておけば大体 OK だろうっていうのもあったのかもしれないですけど、それにしても的確に答えてくださったなっていう印象はありますね。
ちょっとアセモグル先生すごい面白かったので、次は、今日もエクストリームエコノミクスなんですけど、次、MIT 特集を安田先生
そうですね。やりましょう。最強の経済学部とか経済学研究家、MIT にフォーカスを当ててやりましょう。
で実際 MIT に今日本人の方もいて、このアンパンが好きだっていうことを教えてくれたのは、菊池さんという方で、そうですね。ご存知ですよね。
そう、菊池慎之介さんって、今、MIT の Ph.D コースに留学中で、でもまさに、アセモーグル氏の指導を受けている、もう愛弟子がいますんで、いらっしゃるんでね、ぜひ、菊池さんをお招きして、MIT について、あとは、今日聞けなかった、ちょっとこの、アセモーグル氏のいろいろな都市伝説とかもあったりするんで、そのあたりね、教え子である菊池さんに聞けば、結構詳しく教えてくれるんじゃないかと思うんで、
ということで、
聞きたいなと思います。
深掘りしていきたいと思います。ということで、本日のピボットエクストリームエコノミクス特別版、MIT のダロン・アセモーグル先生のインタビューをお届けしました。どうもありがとうございました。
どうもありがとうございました。